Yeah, the drivers are so varied in reality. Like we did a survey on the SIA app at the CWS summit. So when we were sponsors, we did this primarily at the European event in London, and we ran a survey looking at what are the key drivers around people, why people want to address services procurement, what are the key barriers, who owns the problem, all this really, really interesting stuff. And just the drivers, there was a fairly even split between kind of like, risk mitigation, process efficiencies, cost savings, um, and yeah, just general kind of like compliance and governance, I think was the last one. But there was a split. It wasn't like everybody. And do you know what? A lot of people will say cost savings, but that isn't actually necessarily the big driver for a lot of organizations. It's surprising how many organizations will say, well, yeah, we are probably spending way more than we should be, but, you know, no one's caring about that right now. And that might be an organization in a particular situation where they're very profitable and they're just used to the wastage, and they're used to the legacy of doing things in a certain way, and they're not really even thinking about that or worrying about it. Whereas
Mm.
another organization might be really up against it due to market or industry factors that mean they've got to cut costs, they've got to be lean, they can't have any wastage. But the one driver that really does seem to universally motivate organizations and stakeholders within organizations is where there's risk that's keeping that person awake at night because they're thinking, my job is at stake, my reputation is at stake, or my company's reputation is at stake here, or I'm going to be in big trouble if something goes wrong with this from a compliance perspective. And that kind of reputational risk around, for example, in Europe or in the UK, organizations getting fined by the government for having misclassification issues and big fines. The fine's bad, but so's the reputational damage.
Yeah.
And again, that's where it comes back to some of the kind of safety critical type stuff in industries like, I don't know, aerospace or, you know, uh, digital infrastructure, telecoms, that sort of thing, where organizations have got workers that are coming in through service providers, construction, engineering, consulting engineering, all that sort of stuff, where it's actually safety critical work that's being done. And that tends to lean more towards the general thing of like, there's risks here which we just cannot accept, and therefore we need to do something about it. And that sometimes feels to me like a generally a stronger driver than cost savings. And it's almost like, yeah, of course, cost savings is going to be the priority for some people, but it's like it's the obvious label that a lot of people will give it. Whereas actually the thing that will get them off their chair to really jump up and down and scream and shout and say we have to do something about this will be a risk that they just feel is unacceptable. Cost savings will probably be made, almost certainly be made significantly as a byproduct of addressing that risk. But that's something that I've noticed, which is again where it comes down to like this rigor being a key driver. But like you say, you can't just disrupt the way the organization does business. What do you think of that? I mean, in terms of the kind of like,
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. It's funny because growing up in the industry, I didn't go to school for contingent workforce. None of us did. But then you start getting onto projects and various things, and you hear this word risk, and it's just sort of this catch-all. But I
what does
always
it
struggle
all
with, well,
mean?
what do you mean by risk? Like, and I think that's very there's some of the things you cited, yeah, are risky. When you're working in high danger jobs, right? You think of
Oil
like
and
mining,
gas.
oil and gas, mining, anything like that, where it's like, hey, there's like real risk of harm to coming to somebody. But then there's like risk of misclassification. And does your provider on this particular statement of work, do they have subs that are subs of subs? And who is the actual employer? And are these independent contractors? You have things like that, that's risk. You have personal well-being, which is risk. You have they have access to your buildings, or IP, things like that that could be risk there. I mean, I think it's so important to define like when you're concerned about risk or compliance, what does that mean to you, enterprise? And how are you solving that? Because risk, I think, is a vague term we use to generalize something that could affect our PR, could affect our legacy, not our legacy, could affect how we're viewed to the greater good, to the greater world, and how people want to either work for with us, engage with us, how people buy and consume our products, right? That's the funny thing about risk. I'm like, yeah, you can go 100 different ways depending on what does risk mean, and how are you defining it in the context of contingent work, non-employee labor, services, whatnot. And I think you cited some really good examples, but I'll always go back to like so many things in our business is definition. And what does it mean to you?